Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Miller, your storyteller of American folklore, thrilling mysteries, and all sorts of tales. Join me for today's story, folks. Back in the days of the American frontier, around the 1800s, in a small town called Clearwater, Kentucky, there lived a man named Will Quinn. He was a local official, a hard-working guy with big dreams. Will was married to a sharp and kind woman named Sarah Quinn. The two of them were as tight as could be, madly in love, a real partnership. Only thing was, they hadn't had any kids yet. They didn't have much help around the house either, no hired hands or anything fancy like that. Now, the Quinn family wasn't exactly rolling in money. Times were tough back then, with the country still reeling from wars and unrest. Clearwater was a quiet spot, but whispers of opportunity were blowing in from the big city of St. Louis. Folks everywhere were waiting for better days. One evening, Will sat down with Sarah and said, "Honey, by all rights, I ought to keep pushing forward. Maybe take the exams, earn a name for myself as a proper official. Thing is, our situation ain't exactly ideal, and the roads out there are rough. What if we head to St. Louis first? I could land a small job there, something to tide us over. Once things settle down, we can come back home." Sarah looked at him with those steady eyes of hers and said, "Will, I'm just a farmer's daughter. I don't got much say in these big plans. It's up to you." So the two of them handed their little homestead over to some kinfolk to look after. They packed light, just a few dollars and some clothes, and set off for St. Louis, hoping for a fresh start. After Will Quinn and his wife Sarah made it to St. Louis, things didn't exactly go smooth right off the bat. The city was bustling, sure, but it was a whole new world for them. Unfamiliar streets, loud crowds, and a gritty edge they weren't used to back in Clearwater. In a rush to settle down, Will rented a little place on the outskirts of town. But the minute they moved in, he regretted it. Turns out, that spot was a rough patch, a hideout for drifters and shady types. The air was thick with chimney smoke and the stink of trouble. People came and went, hauling goods and settling scores. Sarah, though, she turned heads wherever she went. She'd grown up real pretty, with a kind of grace that stood out even in a dusty frontier town. Some folks mistook her for a saloon girl or a lady of the night. When Will asked around about a decent place to live, everyone just shook their heads. No good options in that neck of the woods. Still, Sarah's looks caught the eye of one fellow in particular, a butcher named Lee Tate. And that, folks, was the spark that lit a mighty big fire. Next door to Will and Sarah lived a woman named Kitty Jones, a working girl, if you catch my drift. Kitty and Lee Tate were thick as thieves, always in and out of each other's business. Now, Lee wasn't just some honest butcher carving up hogs. Truth was, he was a lowlife, a scoundrel who made his real money running scams and stirring up trouble. And once he laid eyes on Sarah Quinn, she was all he could think about. Lee started hanging around Kitty's place more often, pretending it was just neighborly visits. Really, he was keeping tabs on Will and Sarah. Back then, houses weren't much, wood frames with mud-plastered walls, thin as paper. You could hear everything. Snoring, creaking floorboards, even a sneeze from next door. One night, Will and Sarah were whispering about moving somewhere quieter. Lee, with his ear pressed to the wall, caught every word. When he heard they were planning to leave, Lee figured he'd better act fast if he wanted to get his hands on Sarah. The very next day, Will found a peaceful little rental across town. He told Sarah, "I'll head over with our stuff first, then come back for you with a wagon. Won't be more than half an hour." But not even 30 minutes later, two rough-looking men showed up at the door. "Mrs. Quinn," they said, "Will sent us to fetch you. Wagon's waiting outside." Sarah didn't think twice. She trusted folks too easy back then. She climbed into the wagon, and off they went. She didn't know how far they traveled or where they were headed. All she saw was a gate creaking open before the wagon stopped. Sarah stepped down, expecting to see Will. Instead, she was met by a gang of ugly mugs, and not a friendly face among them. Turns out, Lee Tate had been eavesdropping the whole time. He'd seen his chance when Will left to move their things and sent his cronies to snatch Sarah right out from under her husband's nose. When Sarah Quinn realized she'd been tricked, she didn't waste a second. She glared at the roughnecks around her and snapped, "Who in blazes are you people? This is bold as brass. My husband's a clerk from Kentucky, headed here to take up a post. You let me go right now, or you'll regret it. I swear you won't eat a decent meal in peace again." Lee Tate stepped forward with a sly grin, brushing off her threat.
Easy now, Mom.
Just stay here a spell. We'll send you back soon enough. Sarah wasn't having it. That's nonsense, she shot back. I'm a respectable woman. How dare you think I'd stay in a den like this? Lee chuckled, leaning closer.
Little lady, your home's Kentucky, Minas St. Louis.
Seems like fate's brought us together, don't it? Sarah's blood boiled. She hauled off and slapped him clean across the face. In broad daylight, you'd kidnap a decent woman? What's the crime for that, you snake? That slap stung Lee's pride more than his cheek. He rubbed his jaw, his temper flaring. You fancy yourself some high and mighty gal, huh? Well, you don't know who you're dealing with. I don't brag, but once a lady like you lands in my hands, there ain't no escaping.
Isa, you life.
I say you die, you're done. Who's gonna stop me? Sarah stared him down, unflinching. If you're some murdering outlaw, go ahead and kill me then. Lee smirked. A pretty thing like you? Letting you die quick would be too easy, too cheap. No, I've got other plans. His cronies chimed in, egging him on. She's right where she belongs now, boss. No getting out. Might as well play nice, there's perks in it for her. Sarah broke down after that, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to throw herself into the Mississippi River, but there wasn't a drop of water in sight. She thought about smashing her head against the wall or finding a rope, but Lee's men were watching her every move. She was trapped, couldn't live, couldn't die. Lee, though, he was smitten with her beauty. Killing her wasn't on his mind. He figured he'd wait her out, let a few days soften her up before making his next move. To keep her from doing anything rash, he sent his wife, Luella Tate, and his mistress, Bess, to keep an eye on her. Luella, a hard-edged woman, sauntered in and sized Sarah up. Iron bends in the forge, and folks bend when they fall.
You re in deep now, girl. No fluing outer here.
Why not go along with my husband? Save yourself some pain. Sarah's voice trembled but held firm. What kind of law lets you talk like that? I'm no one's prize. Luella shrugged. Sleep with the man a few nights. If you're good, he might keep you as a side piece. If not, we'll sell you off to some fella looking for a wife, or maybe a brothel. You'll fetch a price either way. Work the train station, greet the travelers. Up to you how it plays out. Sarah sobbed harder, clutching a gold hairpin in her hand. It was a keepsake from Will, engraved with Will and Sarah forever. She'd treasured it since the day he gave it to her back in Kentucky. That night, Lee came stumbling in, half drunk and fed up. Sarah still wouldn't budge, and he was itching to force the issue. In a panic, Sarah grabbed that hairpin and jabbed it right into Lee's left eye. He howled, clutching his face as blood poured. She yanked the pin free, and Lee crumpled to the floor, passed out cold from the pain. His wife and mistress scrambled, some trying to patch him up, others cursing Sarah. It took half a day for Lee to come to. When he did, he was spitting mad. You wouldn't have me, fine, but blinding me? You're gonna pay for this. He barked orders, one hand over his ruined eye, get a doc to fix him up, and lock Sarah down tight so she couldn't try anything else. Meanwhile, Will Quinn had dropped off their things at the new place and came back for Sarah. But she was gone. He asked the neighbors. Nobody saw a thing. With no family in St. Louis and no leads, Will searched for 2-3 days straight. Nothing. Desperate, he marched to the St. Louis sheriff's office and filed a complaint, even pointing fingers at the neighbors. Kitty Jones on one side, a tanner named Jed on the other. The sheriff hauled them in, but neither knew where Sarah had gone. Deputies scoured the city, but Will's wife was a ghost. With no luck, Will gave up the rented shack and holed up in a boarding house, juggling his job hunt with the search for Sarah. While all this was going down, Lee Tate was laid up nursing his busted eye. He started thinking Sarah was more trouble than she was worth. This gal's got too much fight in her, he grumbled. Ain't no taming her for me. Might as well sell her off to someone else. Just then, a fella named Walter Mack rolled into St. Louis. Walt was pushing 50, a newly appointed judge headed to Westport, Missouri, to take over the county court. He'd never had kids and figured he'd pick up a young wife while passing through the city, someone pretty, money no object. When Lee caught wind of this, he saw dollar signs. He wanted to pawn Sarah off on Walt, but he worried she'd put up a fuss. So he sent his wife, Luella, to feel her out first. Luella spun a yarn for Sarah. Listen up, girl. That new judge in Westport just lost his wife. He's looking for a fine lady to warm his home. If you don't fancy sticking around here, why not hitch your wagon to him? Sounds like a decent deal to me. Sarah mulled it over. She was stuck in a bad spot. Couldn't die, couldn't live right. Me and Will were a good pair, she thought, and now this lowlife's torn us apart. If I don't get even, I'll never rest easy, even in the grave. I'm in deep now. Maybe I ought to play along, marry this judge, get out of this cage, and figure things out later. Truth be told, Sarah had another angle. Will was aiming to climb the ladder too, and Westport wasn't far from St. Louis. Maybe, just maybe, she'd cross paths with him again. Still, agreeing to it stung. She cried bitter tears over the whole mess. Luella saw her bawling and figured she wasn't sold. Then she spotted that gold hairpin peeking out. Quick as a flash, Luella snatched it and bolted. Sarah lunged after her, yelling, "Give it back." But Luella was gone. Sarah sank to the floor, sobbing her heart out. That was Will's gift, my lifeline against these thieves. Now it's in their hands, and seeing him again feels like a pipe dream. After that, marrying Walt lost its shine. All she could think about was ending it all, crying till she passed out. In her sleep, Sarah dreamed of a big OL snapping turtle crawling her way. Back home, she was a whiz at cooking turtle stew. Will loved it. Spotting a hefty one in her dream, she grabbed a knife to gut it. But the turtle reared up, startling her so bad she dropped the blade. She reached for her hairpin, only to find it in her hand again. She chucked it at the turtle, then scrambled to pick it up, but it was gone. As she hunted for it, the turtle spoke up in a gravelly voice, "Go with the flow, gal. Don't fuss over me. Kill me, it's soon enough. Touch me, it's soon enough. That hairpin, you'll find it or you won't, no matter. Don't pine for your man. That king ain't yours no more." Sarah thought a talking turtle was plumb crazy. She swung the knife again, but it bit her wrist hard. The pain jolted her awake. "Will always liked turtle," she mused. "I'd cook it up for him. Could be we brought this split on ourselves, killing too many critters. Is that why we're paying now?" Right then, Luella barged back in. "You ready to play nice, or what? Don't drag your feet, time's wasting." Sarah had no choice but to nod. Lee was thrilled, but he wasn't dumb. This gal's tricky, he thought. If she spills the beans to the judge, I'm cooked. Can't do this deal here. So Lee told a go-between his name was Huck, then moved Sarah to a rundown shack on the edge of town. Word got around quick. Folks whispered about Lee's shady dealings but kept their mouths shut. Soon enough, Judge Walt Mack showed up to take a look. Sarah was a stunner, even worn down, and Walt was sold. He paid up, and they tied the knot right then and there. Sarah didn't have much say in it. Lee had her cornered. If she hadn't gone along, she'd have kept fighting till she dropped dead. And if she died, how'd she ever find Will again? So she became Mrs. Walter Mack, though it wasn't by choice. Sarah Quinn, now Sarah Mack, settled into life with Judge Walter Mack in Westport, Missouri. Walt had married her hoping for a son to carry on his name, but he couldn't help doting on her beauty. He treated her more like a treasure than a wife sometimes. Still, Sarah wasn't happy. Not a single day went by where she felt at peace. She wore her sorrow like a heavy coat, her face drawn tight with bitterness. Walt figured it was just nerves from being newlywed. But 2 years rolled by, and Sarah's expression stayed as sour as a green persimmon. He wasn't thrilled about it, but out in public, Walt was a straight shooter. As a judge, he handed out rewards and punishments fair and square, earning the respect of Westport's townsfolk. Walt was middle-aged by then, and his first wife, before she'd passed, had once urged him to remarry. "We're near 50, she'd said. No kids to show for it, and I ain't getting younger. You've got years ahead, find another gal, raise a boy to keep the family going. I'll stay home, pray, and leave the rest to you." That's why he'd picked Sarah up in St. Louis. One crisp fall night, the harvest moon glowing big and orange, Sarah seemed lonelier than ever. Walt noticed and sat her down. "You've been with me 2 years now, Sarah, and I ain't seen you smile once. What's eating at you?" Sarah sighed. "Folks feel happy or sad for a reason, Walt. If I'm content, I can't fake misery. If I'm miserable, I can't fake joy. Walt scratched his chin, thoughtful. You're a looker with a good heart. I've never treated you like some floozy. Why can't you level with me? Sarah hesitated. I'm a decent woman, Walt. That's all I've got to offer. Just grateful you don't look down on me. Walt pressed her. You're from Kentucky, right? Your husband, is he dead or alive? How'd you end up with that Huck fella in St. Louis? Sarah perked up at that. So that snake's name was Huck, huh? Walt blinked, caught off guard. You lived with him and didn't know his name? Who was your husband, anyhow? Sarah's voice cracked. I was sold off like cattle. Naming my husband now would just shame him. Best I keep it quiet. Walt saw the pain in her eyes and softened. You've had it rough, I can tell. If we ever get wind of your old man, I'll see you two back together, I swear it. Sarah dropped to her knees, tears spilling. Bless you, Walt. May you live 100 years and have a house full of grandkids. For the first time in over 2 years, a faint smile broke across her face. Walt nodded, touched by the depth of her loyalty. Another year passed. One day, a stranger rode into Westport and told Walt, the new schoolmaster's here to pay his respects. He handed over a letter of introduction. Walt skimmed it. The guy was from Kentucky, 28 years old, a clerk-turned-teacher named William Quinn. At first, Walt didn't connect the dots, didn't think this Will Quinn could be Sarah's Will. But then, over drinks one night, Will got loose-lipped and spilled his story, a wife lost in St. Louis, years of searching, the whole sorry tale. Walt's ears perked up, but he didn't rush to play matchmaker. He wanted to be sure. Walt hatched a plan. He invited everyone to scribble some poetry, something to speak their mind. Will wrote a piece and signed it, Will Quinn, Clearwater, Kentucky. Back home, Walt left the paper on the table where Sarah would see it. She picked it up, recognized the handwriting instantly, and spotted the signature. Her heart skipped. This is my Will's hand. 5 years gone, and he's a teacher now, maybe even a big shot. But if he's made it this far, has he taken another wife? She wrestled with it, half angry, half heartbroken. He's been missing me all this time, but what if he's moved on? I've been another man's wife, how do I face him now? Sarah beat her chest in frustration, torn to pieces. Walt watched her fall apart and asked, What's wrong, darlin'? Sarah choked out, This new schoolmaster's got the same name as my husband, same hometown too. It's tearing me up. Walt knew then it was likely true, but he played it cool. Lots of folks share names. Could be a mix-up. I'll check it out myself. A few days later, Judge Walter Mack invited Will Quinn over for supper at his place in Westport. He told the cook, We've got the new schoolmaster coming tonight. He's a refined fella, so make the grub extra special. Sarah overheard and piped up, We having turtle stew tonight, Walt? Walt raised an eyebrow. You don't usually cook turtle, Sarah. Ain't on the menu tonight either. Sarah nodded, thoughtful. Just figured this Will might fancy it. Thought I'd ask. Truth was, Walt did enjoy a good turtle stew now and then, bought snapping turtles regular to keep his strength up. Back in Kentucky, Sarah used to whip it up for her Will all the time. Since St. Louis though, the thought of turtle brought back too many memories, plus that weird dream she'd had at Lee Tate's place. She'd sworn off cooking it. But tonight, she offered, hoping to test this schoolmaster. Walt caught her drift but kept quiet. When Will Quinn arrived, they all sat down to a fine meal. Everyone was laughing and swapping stories, till the turtle stew hit the table. Will took a few bites, then his eyes welled up. Walt leaned in. What's the matter, son? Will wiped his face. My wife Sarah, back in Kentucky, she was a wizard with turtle stew. Skinned 'em, chopped the meat just right. This dish you've got here tastes exactly like hers. Hit me hard is all. Walt tilted his head. Thought your wife passed on years ago. Never asked before. Will shook his head. Not dead, just lost. We came to St. Louis together, and she vanished. Been looking ever since. He laid out the whole story, the move, the rented shack, her disappearance. Walt listened close, then swung open the kitchen door. Sarah, come on out here. Sarah stepped into the room, and when she locked eyes with Will, neither said a word, just grabbed each other and sobbed. Walt cleared his throat. I took a man's wife as my own, and that's a heavy sin. Didn't know till now, thank God we've got no kids. She's yours again, Will. Will wiped his eyes. How much did you pay for her back then, Judge? I'll square it up. Walt waved him off. Talking money now's tacky. You two take the night, catch up. That evening, Will and Sarah stayed up till dawn, spilling everything from start to finish. Next day, Walt wrote out his resignation. I'm too old for this judge game anyhow, he said, packing his bags. Sarah turned to Will. We're together again cause of Walt. No two ways about it. But this all started with that no-good varmint who tore us apart. If we don't settle that score, I'll never sleep easy. Will frowned. I'm an official now, sure, but my post's small potatoes. We don't even know that skunk's real name or where he's at. Where do we start? Sarah clenched her fists. All I know is he called himself Huck. Walt heard it too. Will stuck around Westport another year, building his reputation. Soon enough, his hard work paid off. He got promoted to sheriff of St. Louis County, right back where it all went wrong. Sarah lit up when she heard. St. Louis is where that rat split us up. Now you're the law there, judge and jury for the folks. We can track down that snake who ruined us. Will took Sarah with him when he started the job. He was swamped from day one, cases piling up left and right. He cherry-picked the big ones to tackle himself. One caught his eye, a gang of thieves, gamblers, and killers. What really boiled his blood was how they'd roped in young kids to do their dirty work. Will decided to haul them in personally. Turned out, the ringleader was none other than Lee Tate, dragged into court by a pack of furious locals. Lee's life of vice was no secret. Him, his wife Luella, and his mistress Bess were rotten to the core. While Lee was out raising hell, Luella and Bess were playing their own games back home. Any friend Lee brought around, they'd snag for themselves, kept it hush-hush from him. Folks called it Blind Lee's comeuppance, and it hit fast. Lee Tate's crew had a knack for trouble, and one of their messes landed right in Sheriff Will Quinn's lap. Among the bunch was a kid, barely 17, named Teddy Carson. Folks called him Sweet Ted for his smooth talk. Ted got tangled up with Lee's outfit, spending his days drinking, gambling, and running wild. Lee liked the kid's hustle, but Luella and Bess? They liked him a whole lot more. Whenever Lee was out, Luella and Bess took turns cozying up to Sweet Ted. Luella, being the queen bee with cash to burn, hogged most of his time. She'd dip into her stash, money Lee didn't know about, and shower Ted with it. Even that gold hairpin Sarah had stabbed Lee with ended up in Ted's hands, a little gift from Luella. Ted wasn't picky, he'd take anything Lee's household had to offer, lock, stock, and barrel. Lee spent his life fleecing folks, never dreaming he'd get played in his own backyard. Sweet Ted didn't care much either way, he'd breeze in and out, hitting up Kitty Jones's place next door to gamble. One night, he crossed paths with a sharp-eyed drifter named Tom Kelly. Tom was a card shark, and Ted lost big time after time, till he was flat broke. In a desperate move, he wagered that gold hairpin and lost it to Tom. Tom, grinning ear to ear, stuck the pin in his hat like a trophy. Bad luck for him, Lee Tate picked that exact moment to swing by Kitty's. He clocked the hairpin right off and asked to borrow it for a closer look. His jaw dropped. It was Luella's favorite trinket, same one Sarah had used on him. Kitty shrugged. Sweet Ted lost it to this fella fair and square. Lee wasn't dumb. He put two and two together. Luella was stepping out with Ted behind his back. He couldn't stomach the betrayal, but airing dirty laundry in public wasn't his style. He'd lose too much face. So he cooked up a scheme. Lee tracked down Ted's pa, Old Man Carson, and laid it out. Your boy's been gambling away stuff he don't own, like this hairpin. Got it off some hustler in St. Louis County. Word is, the new sheriff's cracking down. Why not file a complaint? Get your goods back and teach Ted a lesson. Old Man Carson was steamed. Ted's always swiping junk from home, but this pin? No clue where he dug it up. Lee smirked. Gambling dens don't care about where. File the claim, trust me. Carson took the bait, and sure enough, the case landed on Will Quinn's desk. Will hauled Sweet Ted in for questioning. You're a young buck, he said, barely wet behind the ears. Why ain't you learning a trade instead of stealing and betting it all away? Ted slouched, defiant. Never took a dime from Pa's pocket. Will snorted. Your old man suing you, kid. Still wanna play tough. Ted clammed up, so Will nodded to the deputy. Strip him down and give him a licking. The deputy walloped Ted, till he was bawling for his mama. Lee Tate, watching from the sidelines, grinned like a fox in a henhouse. He'd wanted the sheriff to rough Ted up, payback for the kid's double-crossing. He even slipped a signal to a deputy he'd greased beforehand, keep the blows coming. But Will caught the gesture, sharp as a tack. He figured Ted was just a dumb kid, not worth breaking, and called off the beating. Will turned to Tom Kelly next. You lured this boy into gambling and took his stuff. What's that crime carry? Tom scoffed. Where's that coming from? I played him once, clean as a whistle, no luring, no stealing. Will pressed, Carson's got one son. If you didn't sweet-talk him into it, why's his pa here hollering? Tom shrugged. Ted's got other gambling pals. Ain't my fault. Old man Carson jumped in. It's this joker who roped my boy in. Nobody else took his loot, here's the tally. He waved a list Lee had slipped him. Lee couldn't resist piping up. There's that gold hairpin too, we'll cut him off cold. You're a witness, not the judge. Pipe down. He signaled the deputies, and they laid into Lee 20 hard whacks till he shut his trap. Will turned back to Tom. Spill it, where'd that pin come from? Tom spilled the beans, the game at Kitty's, the whole deal. He fished the hairpin from his sleeve and handed it over. Will took one look, Will and Sarah forever etched on it. His heart stopped. It was the one he'd given her back in Kentucky. He kept his cool though. This Ted's loot, maybe his ma's. Could be the fella who sold Sarah was this Carson guy. But she said his name was Huck. Will dismissed the courtroom, took the pin, and headed to the back room where Sarah was waiting. Here, he said, handing it to her. Was aiming to dig into this mess, and it walked right to us. She said the guy was Huck, this kid's a Carson. What's the fit? Sarah's eyes lit up. The Huck fella, I gouged out his left eye. Had a wife and a gal on the side, no kids. That's him. Will nodded. Forget the names for now. We'll sort it with this Ted kid. Sheriff Will Quinn strode back into the courtroom, his boots thumping the wood floor. He fixed his gaze on sweet Ted Carson. All right, kid, he said, voice steady as steel. Where'd you get that gold hairpin? Ted was already shaking from the earlier thrashing. It was from Lee Tate's wife Luella, he stammered. She gave it to me. Will's eyes narrowed. Luella hands you a trinket like that out of the blue? Sounds like she's stepping out on Lee with you. Ted just hung his head, lips sealed tight. Will turned and barked, bring Lee Tate up here. Lee shuffled forward, dropping to his knees before the bench. Will sized him up, left eye gone, just like Sarah said. His gut told him everything. This was the snake who'd sold his wife. Lee, Will said, holding up the hairpin, you recognize this? Lee played dumb, shaking his head. Will pressed on. Tell me about your folks, wife, kids, the works. One wife, Luella, and a gal on the side, Bess, Lee muttered. No young uns. It lined up perfect with Sarah's story. Will slammed his fist on the desk. Bold move, Lee. How'd that left eye of yours get gouged out? Spit it out now. Lee froze, sweat beading on his forehead. Will's words hit like a thunderclap, but Lee tried to tough it out, staying mum. Will wasn't having it. You wanna play coy? Fine. He nodded to the deputies. Lay into him. They beat Lee till he was squealing like a stuck pig, then slumped over, out cold. Will sent for Luella next. She stumbled into the courtroom, pale as a ghost. Her husband was a bloody heap, and that hairpin sat right there on the bench. She knew the jig was up. Before Will could ask a thing, she spilled it all, how Lee snatched Sarah, how they sold her off, even how she'd been fooling around with sweet Ted. Every dirty detail came tumbling out. Will leaned back, staring Luella down. You helped your man steal a woman, then cheated on him to boot. No blessing comes from that kind of wickedness. 40 lashes for you. He turned to the deputies. And 20 each for Bess and the rest of that sorry crew. Then came the reckoning. Lee Tate, Will declared, you've piled up sins like cordwood, robbery, kidnapping, murder. That's a hanging offense. We're seizing your property too. Your wife and mistress can rot in jail. As for the others, Sweet Ted, Kitty Jones, Tom Kelly, they weren't saints either. We'll doled out their punishments, jail time and fines all around. Old man Carson, though, walked free, didn't have a hand in the mess. Lee, half dead from the beating, got dragged off to the gallows that night and swung before dawn. A lifetime of evil, and all he left behind was a noose and a widow's debt. Will headed home, weary but satisfied, and found Sarah waiting. It's done, he told her. Lee's swinging, and his whole rotten outfit's busted. We're square now. Sarah's face lit up, brighter than it had in years. She thought back to that turtle dream from Lee's shack. If I hadn't cooked that stew for you and Walt, how'd we ever have found each other? That turtle said, kill me it's soon, touch me it's soon. Guess it meant this. And if Luella hadn't swiped that hairpin, it wouldn't have circled back to nail Lee. Find it or not, it's fine, that's what it told me. Funny how it all fits. She paused, then added, back when Lee took me, I lost you, a king in my eyes. Then Walt stepped in, another king I didn't want. That turtle knew more than I did. Will grinned, pulling her close. He kept his sheriff gig in St. Louis County a while longer, then got a cushy post back in Kentucky, Clearwater's mayor, with honors to boot. He and Sarah settled there for good. Kids never came, but they had each other, healthy as horses till the end. Walter Mack, bless him, got his own happy twist. Touched by fate or just plain luck, he fathered a son at 50-something with a new wife back in Missouri. His line carried on strong. This whole mess started with Lee Tate's greed, him and his no-good women. Thank the stars they got what was coming. Walt, though? He's the real hero here, decent to the bone. Without him, there'd be no reunion, no revenge. His good deeds even landed him that boy in his old age. So here's the moral, folks, good and evil get their due. It's just a matter of when. This tale's all about stomping out the bad and lifting up the good, pure positive vibes, no old-world nonsense. Don't read too deep into it. Just remember, do right, and you'll be all right. Do wrong, and the sky's got a way of settling the score. All right, folks, that wraps up our first yarn. Thanks for sticking around. I'm Nancy Miller, and I've got another humdinger for you. Don't miss out, this one's gonna grab you by the collar. The title? The Midwife Widow and the Midnight Scent. Picture this, it's the 1870s, just outside the bustling town of Dayton, Ohio, in a little farming hamlet called Clover Hollow. There lived a widow named Clara Tanner. When folks talked about Clara's life, they'd shake their heads and sigh. At 20, Clara married a local boy, Tom Tanner, from Clover Hollow. They tied the knot young, full of hope. But after the wedding, Clara couldn't conceive, year after year, nothing. Finally, when she hit 30, she gave birth to a strapping baby boy. Tom and Clara were over the moon, until the unthinkable happened. The kid took sick at 3 years old and passed away, no rhyme or reason. That blow broke Tom's heart. He couldn't take it, wasted away and died not long after. From then on, Clara was on her own, guarding her widowhood like a solemn vow. Maybe the heavens took pity on her, 'cause 5 years later, she found a little orphan boy wandering the road. She took him in, raised him as her own, and called him Jimmy. Clara wasn't just any widow, mind you. She was Clover Hollow's midwife, steady-handed, brave, and darn good at her trade. She'd been delivering babies for years, never a hitch. Near and far, from Dayton to the next county over, folks called on Clara when a young'un was on the way. One lazy afternoon, Clara was sitting at home, mending a quilt, when a sharp knock rattled her door. She hustled over and swung it open. Standing there was a feller in his 40s, broad-shouldered and weathered, Jed Harper, the hired man for a well-off family just outside Dayton, the Warrens. Clara knew Jed by sight. "What brings you here, Jed?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Jed cracked a grin. "Afternoon, Clara. The missus up at the Warren place sent me. Got a favor to ask, something big." Clara tilted her head. She'd been to the Warrens a handful of times, not often, but enough to know the lay of the land. Silas Warren, the head of the house, was a merchant pushing 45. Back when he was 20, he'd married a gal named Abigail, sweethearts from the start, living comfortable. Only hitch was, after all those years, Abigail hadn't borne him a single child. Silas is over 40 now, Clara thought. Could Abigail be expecting at her age? She squinted at Jed. What's Abigail want with me? She in the family way. Jed didn't answer straight off. He glanced around, real sneaky-like, then lowered his voice. Clara, this ain't the spot to talk. Mind if we step inside? Clara crossed her arms. Now hold on, Jed. You know I'm a widow. A man like you waltzing into my house? If word gets out, they'll talk me into the ground. Whatever it is, spit it out here. Jed chuckled, scratching his neck. Fair enough, but hear me out. I'm here on serious business, not the kind to holler about in the yard. I'll keep it quick, I swear. Before Clara could argue, he brushed past her and stepped inside. She sighed and followed, shutting the door. All right, Jed, out with it. What's this about? Jed didn't say a word at first. Instead, he fished a small cloth pouch from his coat, set it on her table, and untied it. Inside gleamed $2 silver. Clara's brow furrowed. What's this nonsense? Jed smiled easy. Clara, these coins are a little thank you from Mrs. Warren. She knows you've had it rough, so she sent me to show some kindness. That's all. Clara wasn't buying it. $2 from Abigail Warren? I've barely spoken to her twice. What's she after, Jed? I ain't some charity case. Take it back. She scooped up the pouch and shoved it into his hands. Jed held up a palm. Whoa, slow down. There's more to it. You know Silas took a second wife last year, Ellen Shaw, young thing. She's due any day now, half a month off. Abigail figures you're the best midwife around these parts. She wants you to deliver Ellen's baby. This money's your fee. Clara relaxed a smidge. Oh, that's it? Why all the cloak and dagger? I'll help out when the time comes. Don't need a fortune for it neither. Tell her that. Jed's grin faded a touch. Thing is, Abigail's got another angle. She told me special-like, when you're delivering that baby, keep your eyes peeled. Pay close attention. His voice took on a hard edge, and his face tightened, just enough for Clara to catch a whiff of trouble. Clara Tanner caught the edge in Jed Harper's voice and the glint in his eye. She wasn't born yesterday. Something was off. Silas Warren had money to burn, a fine house outside Dayton, and no heirs to leave it to. That'd twist any man up. Back then, folks didn't fuss much about a fella taking a second wife if he was past 40 and kidless. Custom, not law, but it held weight. Last year, Silas had hashed it out with Abigail and brought Ellen Shaw home as his bride. Abigail couldn't have kids herself, so she'd let it slide, no choice really. Ellen, though, hit the ground running. Barely settled in, and she was expecting. If she popped out a boy, or even a girl, Silas would have his heir. Where'd that leave Abigail? Her say in the Warren house would shrink faster than a puddle in July. Jed didn't spell it out, but Clara could hear the tune. Abigail wanted her to fix things during the delivery, make sure that baby didn't see daylight. Clara's hands had brought dozens of kids into the world, never once stained with harm. Take money to snuff out a life, she thought. Not on my watch. But if she said no, Abigail might just find someone else. Plenty of midwives would bend for a payout.
Back in the day, some während abofe dirty tricks. Slipping a motor so meeting to ease the pain till she bled out, or smothering a newborn queet-like.
Clara chewed it over, then landed on a plan. All right, Jed, she said, cool as a cucumber.
I get Abigail's drift.
Tell her not to worry, I've got it handled. Jed's face split into a grin, like he'd just won a bet. He tipped his hat and hightailed it out of Clover Hollow, pleased as punch. Days later, Clara was trudging home after a delivery 10 miles off. It was late, moon high, stars sharp, and she took a shortcut through the woods to check on Jimmy sooner. Halfway down the path, under a big pine, she spotted a shadow hunched low. Her heart jumped to her throat. She crept closer, borrowing the moonlight, and saw it clear, a wolf gray and lean crouched there. Its eyes glowed green, locked on her. Clara's first thought was to bolt, but then she wondered, can I outrun a wolf?
Chefrotze, Wettchen.
The critter didn't budge, didn't growl, didn't lunge. Then, slow as molasses, the wolf stood and padded toward her. Clara broke out in a cold sweat, legs itching to run but stuck like roots. It reached her, close enough to feel its breath, and she couldn't believe it. Instead of snapping, it grabbed her skirt hem with its teeth and tugged.
Clara blinked. You want me to follow you.
The wolf dipped its head, like a nod. She swallowed hard.
All recht, Wolf, I'll go. But you better not turn on me.
Another nod, and off it went, glancing back to make sure she trailed. It wasn't long before they hit a rocky den tucked in the trees. Before Clara even stepped inside, she heard a low, pained whimpering. Peering in, she saw a she-wolf, belly swollen. It wasn't long before they hit a rocky den tucked in the trees. Before Clara even stepped inside, she heard a low, pained whimpering. Peering in, she saw a she-wolf, belly swollen, twisting in agony. Next to her lay a tiny pup, fresh-born and shivering. Clara put it together quick. The she-wolf was struggling to deliver the rest of her litter. The male wolf, her guide, stood by, eyes pleading.
Clara sitzt ab the motor. Weak, panting, no milk yet.
Those unborn pups wouldn't make it without help. She rolled up her sleeves. Guess I'm delivering wolf babies tonight, she muttered. With steady hands, she knelt beside the she-wolf, coaxing her through the labor. One by one, a few more pups slid into the world, wet and wriggling. The mother was spent, too frail to nurse right off. The pups yipped, hungry and cold.
Clara's heart tucked. She couldn't let em starve.
She dug into her satchel, pulled out some bread and jerky she'd packed, and mashed it soft with her fingers. Bit by bit, she fed it to the she-wolf till the poor thing perked up a little. After a busy spell, the den quieted down, mother and pups safe. Clara dusted off her knees and turned to leave. The male wolf padded over and dropped low, bowing its head like it was thanking her. Clara stood there, stunned, then gave it a nod back. Take care of him, she said, and headed home to Jimmy. Half a month later, trouble stirred. It was a sunny day and Jimmy, Clara's adopted boy, hadn't come home by dusk. Normally, when Clara was out delivering babies, he'd play with the Clover Hollow kids and be back before dark. But tonight, she waited and waited, no sign of him. She scoured the village, asking every soul she met. Nobody'd seen Jimmy. Panic crept in, her chest tightening. Just then, Jed Harper showed up at her door, breathless. Clara, Ellen's time's come, baby's on the way.
You gotta hustle over.
Clara's mind was a storm. My boy's missing, and they want me to play midwife. She shook her head at Jed. Jimmy's gone, I can't think straight till I find him. Jed softened, putting a hand on her shoulder. I get it, Clara. Tell you what, I'll round up some hands to hunt for Jimmy. You go help Ellen.
Deal.
Clara weighed it, torn, then nodded. She grabbed her midwife kit and followed Jed. They took the woodsy shortcut again, and wouldn't you know it, right where she'd met that wolf before, another one darted out from behind the pine. It planted itself square in their path, teeth bared. Jed yelped, dropping to the dirt like a sack of potatoes. Clara, though, held her ground. She squinted. It was the same wolf from the den, she'd swear it. Stepping forward, she asked, "What's wrong? Need help again?" The wolf shook its head. Clara frowned. "Then why you blocking me?" It didn't answer, just flicked its eyes toward Jed glaring. Clara caught the hint. "Oh, I see, you don't want me delivering that baby, do you?" The wolf nodded sharp. "Don't fret," she said, smiling faint. "I know what I'm doing." The wolf didn't budge, still wary. Clara sighed. "If I don't go, Ellen and her child might die, 2 lives gone. I can't let that happen."
Ivy got a plan, trust me.
That seemed to ease the wolf. It backed off slow, melting into the trees. Clara helped Jed up, and they pressed on to the Warren place, just a holler away now. Jed stopped short of the gate. "Clara," he said, low and serious, "you remember what Abigail wants, right?" She played dumb. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jed smirked, cold. "Don't pull that with me. We had a deal, that baby can't stick around. You said you'd handle it." Clara's stomach churned. She'd guessed Abigail's game, but hearing it plain still shook her. She steadied herself and nodded.
"Don't worry, yet. Ivy got it under control."
He grinned, satisfied, and waved her on. "Good. Do it right, and you'll see Jimmy again, plus a fat payout. Cross me, though, and you'll wish you hadn't." Your call. Clara stood there, Jed's threat ringing in her ears. After a long beat, she made up her mind. Tell Abigail it's as good as done, she said, voice flat. Jed's grin widened, and he hustled off to report back. Inside, the Warren house was chaos. Silas pacing, Ellen groaning, and Abigail hovering like a hawk. Clara had a job to do, but Jimmy's face stayed sharp in her mind. By the time Clara Tanner stepped into the Warren house, it was a madhouse. Silas Warren, over 40 and finally facing fatherhood, was a bundle of nerves, pacing the parlor like a caged bear. He spotted Clara and rushed over.
Clara, Jure hier.
You're the best midwife this side of Ohio. My wife and baby, they're in your hands. Keep 'em safe, and I'll make it worth your while. Abigail Warren chimed in, her voice syrupy but sharp. That's right, Clara. Do your best now, be real careful. Same words as Silas, different tune. Clara caught the undertone and kept her mouth shut, nodding curtly. Let's not jaw about it, show me to Ellen. Before she even crossed the threshold, Clara heard moans, raw ragged cries cutting through the dim. She hurried in and found Ellen Shaw sprawled on the bed, lamplight flickering over her sweat-soaked face. 2 hired girls hovered nearby, wringing their hands, clueless. Clara didn't flinch. She stepped up, checked Ellen quick, and knew right off, this was a tough one, baby wasn't coming easy. Hang in there, Ellen, she said, then got to work. Abigail lingered close, watching like a hawk. Clara, she murmured, you be extra mindful. Silas waited years for this, you can't slip up. The words dripped with a meaning Clara couldn't miss. She gritted her teeth, torn for a split second. Ellen's screams snapped her back. Hot water now, she barked. Back in those days, hot water was gold for birthing. Cleaned things up, eased the mother's ache, kept her from tiring out too fast. It opened the way, sped things along. The Warrens had it ready, a kettle steaming, a basin, some brown sugar tea for strength, standard kit for a frontier birth. One of the girls hustled over with a basin, vapor curling off it. Clara dipped her blood-streaked hands in, wrung out a cloth, and started wiping Ellen down. Then it hit her, a strange whiff, sharp and wrong. She froze, sniffing again. This ain't just water, she thought.
Tat Sassafras and Pennyroyal, strong Stuf.
Her mind raced. Those herbs weren't for soothing, they'd kick a woman's blood flowing hard. Ellen was already teetering on the edge of bleeding out, like too many mothers did back then. One wrong move with that brew, and she'd be gone, no chance. This ain't saving water, Clara realized. It's a death sentence. She locked eyes with Abigail, who smirked, cool as ice. What's the holdup, Clara? Get to it, that baby's what counts. Clara's blood ran hot. She saw it clear, Abigail had spiked the water, banking on her to use it and finish Ellen off quiet-like. With a tight smile, she shot back, this water's no good, Mrs. Warren. Fetch a fresh basin, quick. Abigail's face twitched, caught off guard. What are you playing at? Don't you care about your boy? Jimmy's name stung, and Clara's eyes welled up. But she held firm. Can't use this, end of story. Abigail's plan was unraveling, and she couldn't push without tipping her hand. Scowling, she waved a girl off for new water. With clean water in hand, Clara worked fast. Ellen fought through, and soon enough, a healthy cry pierced the air, a baby girl pink and squalling. Mother and child pulled through, safe. Abigail's glare could have bored holes, but Clara just exhaled, slumping against the bedpost. Tears hit the floor as she crumpled, worn to the bone. Ellen and her little one were fine, but Jimmy, where was he? Darkness took her, and she passed out cold. Next morning, a familiar voice cut through the fog. Ma, wake up. Clara's eyes flew open. Jimmy stood there, grinning by her bedside. She bolted upright. Jimmy, you all right? What happened? He spilled it fast. Yesterday, on his way home, some roughneck had nabbed him, hauled him up a ridge, and stashed him in a cave. Come dawn, 2 men hashed out a plan to kill him. Right then, a wolf charged in, tore him to ribbons and carried Jimmy off on its back, straight to the Warren gate. Silas burst in, wide-eyed. Clara, you're up. Step outside, you won't believe this. That wolf dropped your boy off at dawn, then went berserk, tore into Abigail and Jed. What in tarnation's going on? Clara staggered to the yard. There lay Abigail and Jed, bloodied and moaning, kneeling under a wolf's stare, the same one from the woods. It spotted Clara and trotted over, nuzzling her leg like a loyal hound. Clara Tanner stood in the Warren yard, staring at the scene, Abigail Warren and Jed Harper, battered and bleeding, cowering on their knees. That wolf, her strange guardian from the woods, sat calm by her side, its gray fur streaked with red. Silas Warren gaped, hands on his hips. Clara, what in the Sam Hill is this? That critter hauled your boy back, then tore into my wife and Jed like a tornado. Clara took a deep breath and laid it all out. She told Silas how Abigail and Jed had cooked up a scheme, spiked the birthing water with sassafras and pennyroyal to kill Ellen and the baby, keeping Abigail's place atop the heap. How they'd snatched Jimmy to force her hand, threatening his life if she didn't play along. I couldn't do it, Silas, she said. That wolf, it knew somehow. Saved my boy and brought him to justice. Silas's face went from shock to fury, red as a beet. He glared at Abigail, who shrank under his gaze, and Jed, who wouldn't meet his eyes. You too, he roared, scheming under my roof, against my own flesh and blood? That's lower than a snake's belly. Without another word, he stormed off, hollering for the hired hands. Get the sheriff now. The law came quick. Abigail and Jed were hauled off to Dayton's jailhouse, their plot unraveled for all to see. After a swift trial, the truth came out stark. Abigail's jealousy and Jed's greed had nearly cost 2 lives, 3 counting Jimmy. Silas didn't hold back his thanks. Clara, you saved my family. I owe you more than I can repay. Clara and Jimmy had been scraping by in Clover Hollow, so Silas made an offer. Move in here, he said. Your family now. He took Jimmy under his wing, taught him his letters and figures, named him his godson. Clara settled into a quiet life, helping out where she could, her midwife days winding down. Over a decade later, Jimmy hit his stride. He studied hard, took the exams, and landed a clerk's post in Dayton, made Clara proud as a peacock. She lived out her years peaceful, no sickness to speak of, till she passed gentle in her sleep. When they laid her to rest, folks swore they heard wolves howling round her grave for days, mournful, like kin saying goodbye. It moved more'n a few to tears. That's the tale, folks, done and dusted. If you liked it, drop a note below. Don't forget to subscribe and share, I'd sure appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time with another yarn.